The air in the king's compound, Epooyo, was thick with the scent of shea butter and grilled plantains. Amidst this bustling life, the young princess Folake moved like a piece of living sunlight, her laughter a melody that made the elders nod in contentment. Her beauty was not just in her smooth, dark skin or the beads woven into her intricate braids, but in the innocent kindness that shone from her eyes. Her father, King Alyamide, watched her with pride, convinced he had been blessed with the most perfect child. Folake's mother, the chief queen, had passed years ago, leaving a void that was both vast and palpable. Yet, the memory of the queen's gentle spirit seemed to live on in her daughter, making Folake the true heart of the royal household. She spent her days learning the ancient stories and healing herbs from the palace wise woman, preparing for a future where she would lead her people with grace. The entire kingdom adored her, seeing in her the promise of a golden age. The king, in his loneliness and out of the need for an official queen to stand beside him, eventually remarried. He chose a beautiful woman from a neighboring village, also named Folake, a common but respected name. This second Folake was strikingly elegant, with eyes that promised both fire and loyalty, an alluring mix that captivated the king. The Princess Folake, always loving, welcomed her stepmother with an open heart, offering her a handcrafted piece of jewelry. Beneath the new Queen Folake's polished exterior, however, a slow poison of resentment had begun to brew. She had believed marrying the king would make her the sole focus of his affection and the kingdom's admiration. To her horror, the king's deepest love remained clearly dedicated to his daughter, the princess. Every compliment paid to the princess felt like a stone thrown at her own prestige. The queen's smile began to harden at the edges whenever the princess was near. The princess remained oblivious, showering her stepmother with gifts and affection, trying to bridge the gap left by her late mother. The queen, interpreting this genuine kindness as a smug display of superiority, only grew colder. The tension, invisible to the king, was a silent, venomous snake coiling in the heart of the palace, ready to strike at the light. The king, blinded by his own happiness and the duties of the throne, failed to see the slow destruction of his home. Days turned into months, and the queen's internal struggle escalated into a consuming obsession. She would spend hours staring into a polished bronze mirror, but all she ever saw reflected back was the shadow of the princess's superior glow. The subjects would praise the princess's demeanor during festivals, completely overshadowing the queen's elaborate dress and jewelry. Folake the daughter is the true sun. Folake the wife is merely the moon's reflection. She overheard a servant whisper one market day. The king, trying to appease his new queen, gifted her the finest silks and jewels, but his compliments always carried an unfortunate comparison. "You look beautiful, my queen," he would say. "Your smile reminds me of my first Folake's mother, and your grace is almost as radiant as your stepdaughter's." Each comparison was a dagger twisting in the queen's chest, fueling her irrational fury. The queen began to isolate the princess, subtly at first. She would forget to invite her to family dinners or assign her arduous, unnecessary chores that kept her out of sight when important visitors arrived. The princess, always dutiful, accepted these tasks without complaint, only wondering why her stepmother seemed increasingly distant. The palace staff noticed the shift, exchanging worried glances, but fear kept their lips sealed. One evening, the princess gifted her stepmother a shawl she had painstakingly woven herself, incorporating rare, vibrant indigo dyes. She presented it with a heartfelt plea for closeness. The queen accepted it, forcing a thin smile, but later, in a secluded corner of her chambers, she took a sharp blade and slashed the shawl into ribbons. The act of destruction provided a brief, dark release for the hatred she could no longer contain. It was at this moment, staring at the ruined cloth, that the idea took root. A thought so terrifying and absolute it brought a cold sweat to her brow. The problem was not the comparison. The problem was Folake herself. Only by extinguishing the source of the light could the queen truly shine alone. The whisper in her heart became a command. The princess had to be eliminated. The queen's plot was meticulous, wrapped in a veneer of royal responsibility. She summoned the princess and spoke of an ancient ritual demanding a rare, night-blooming flower found only deep within the forest of whispers. "It is a task for a pure heart," a test of your fitness to be the king's true heir," the queen lied smoothly. The princess's eyes lit up with pride, eager to prove her worth to both her stepmother and her kingdom. The Forest of Whispers was notoriously dangerous, a place where spirits were said to roam and wild beasts preyed. It was forbidden for any unaccompanied person, especially a royal, to enter. The queen, however, insisted the task required absolute secrecy and solitude, playing on the princess's deep-seated sense of duty. She pressed a small, ornate dagger into the princess's hand, claiming it was for protection, but knowing it was far too small to offer any real defense. Folake, the princess, prepared for her journey with a solemn heart, but no fear. She packed only water and some roasted yams, relying on her knowledge of the bush and her faith in the ancestors. She left a note for her father, explaining her sudden departure was for an important, secretive mission to ensure the kingdom's prosperity. She kissed the sleeping king's forehead, a silent farewell she did not know was final. The queen watched the princess depart at dawn from a high window, a chillingly triumphant smile playing on her lips. She had bribed one of the king's disgraced hunters, a man named Ade, promising him a vast tract of land and a lifetime of wealth to follow the girl. His instructions were simple, brutal, and non-negotiable. Ade's conscience wrestled briefly with the enormous sum of gold, but ultimately, greed won the battle. The princess was blissfully unaware of the shadow that stalked her path. She walked with purpose, her heart filled with hope, imagining the proud look on her father's face when she returned with the mythical flower. The deeper she walked into the forest, however, the colder the air became, and the vibrant bird song faded into an ominous silence. The tranquility was an illusion. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath for the approaching tragedy. Days later, deep within the heart of the ancient forest, Princess Folake finally located the glowing, ethereal flower, blooming in a secluded grove near a small, clear spring. She knelt, her face alight with triumph and relief, gently tending to the plant, preparing to harvest it precisely as the queen had instructed. She felt a profound connection to the earth and the spirits, believing she had passed her challenging test. Just as her fingers brushed the velvety petals, a dark figure erupted from the shadows behind a cluster of Irako trees. It was Ade, his eyes wide and panicked, but his resolve solidified by the weight of the gold promised to him. He raised a heavy, crudely fashioned club, breathing heavily. The sound of dry leaves crunching under his heavy boots was the only warning the princess received. The princess spun around, startled, but her royal training kicked in instantly. She drew the small dagger the queen had given her and stood her ground, her voice ringing with authority. "Stop! I am Princess Folake. You are trespassing on royal business." Her innocent bravery only momentarily stalled the hunter, whose guilt transformed into reckless haste. Ade lunged, and the small dagger was useless against his brute strength. The princess cried out, a sound of pure terror and betrayal that echoed briefly through the silent woods. The hunter hesitated for a fraction of a second, seeing the pure light leave her eyes, a sight that would forever haunt his dreams. The queen's evil plan had reached its devastating, heartbreaking conclusion in a flash of violence. The life drained out of Princess Folake, leaving her body still beneath the towering trees. The hunter, shaking violently, took the ornate, unique necklace she wore, the one her mother had given her, as proof for the queen. He covered her body hastily with leaves and branches, then fled the scene, leaving the magical, night-blooming flower untouched, its glow now dim and mournful in the darkening grove. Her spirit, however, did not pass on. It hovered over her lifeless form, a bewildered, heartbroken witness to its own end. Ade returned to the palace under the cover of a moonless night, his clothes muddied and his eyes haunted. He crept to the queen's private chambers, clutching the princess's unique, identifying necklace, the only evidence of his heinous deed. The queen let him in and dismissed her attendants, her face a mask of false calm. The air in the room was thick with the stench of fear and the subtle, sharp scent of blood. He dropped the necklace onto her velvet cushion, refusing to meet her gaze. "It is done, my queen. I swear on the spirits of my ancestors, no one saw. She is buried deep in the forest of whispers." The queen picked up the necklace, her fingers caressing the delicate filigree, a vicious satisfaction blooming in her heart. She felt no remorse, only a profound, intoxicating sense of relief and victory. She then gave the hunter his promised gold and land deed, but her eyes narrowed with cunning. "You must disappear now. If you ever speak a word of this, I will not only take back the wealth, but ensure your entire family is charged with treason against the king." Ade, terrified of her cold malice, promised silence and vanished before dawn, a rich man haunted by a princess's ghost. The next morning, the queen burst into the king's hall, weeping hysterically, the very picture of distraught grief. She showed the king the note the princess had left, claiming that Folake had gone on a secret, powerful mission and had not returned. She suggested the princess was lost or taken by vengeful spirits for daring to tread on sacred ground. Her performance was flawless, completely convincing the already worried king. The king was utterly devastated. He sent out search parties, scouring the edges of the forest, but the queen had successfully steered them away from the deep interior. After weeks of fruitless searching, the king, heartbroken, declared his daughter officially lost to the spirits of the woods. He commissioned a beautiful, empty tomb and wept openly, his reign suddenly shadowed by inconsolable grief. The queen stood beside him during the funeral rites, outwardly sorrowful, inwardly triumphant, now the unchallenged queen of the entire kingdom. Princess Folake's spirit lingered by the Irako tree, anchored to the physical world by the violence of her death and the searing injustice of the betrayal. She was trapped, no longer of the living, yet unable to join the ancestors, who would only receive those who died a peaceful, natural death. Her form was a shimmering distortion, an unseen tremor in the forest air. The magical night-blooming flower she had sought now pulsed with her trapped energy, its light serving as a mournful beacon. Grief was the first emotion, a raw, primal wail of a daughter mourning her lost life and her father's sorrow. But as the days turned into silent weeks, grief curdled into a cold, focused fury. She watched the hunter's trail fade and realized her death was not accidental, but a calculated execution masterminded by the woman who had pretended to be her mother. The spiritual energy around her intensified, causing the leaves on the surrounding trees to perpetually shudder. The princess slowly began to understand the nature of her spectral existence. She could pass through solid objects, hear thoughts, and most powerfully, she could influence the environment through intense focus. She tried desperately to appear before a woodcutter, to write a message in the dirt, but her physical form was too subtle. The sheer willpower of her vengeance was the only thing giving her existence meaning, driving her to learn the rules of the spirit world. She realized that the spirit world mirrored the living. The pure in heart possessed a stronger influence. Her goodness, which the queen had tried to extinguish, now became her greatest weapon. She vowed not to rest until the truth was laid bare before her father, and the treacherous Queen Folake paid the full price. Her innocent love was now reforged into a terrifying spiritual resolve. With a mighty, soundless push of her will, she drew the sacred, night-blooming flower to her spectral form. It dissolved into her being, infusing her with its pure, concentrated magic. It was a catalyst. Her shimmering outline solidified, becoming a clear, ethereal figure, visible only to those with a fractured or highly sensitive soul. The time for mourning was over. The spirit of the true Princess Folake was ready to walk the path of vengeance. Back at Ipioyo, the new Queen Folake reveled in her undisputed position. She wore her finest robes, decorated the king's chambers in her preferred colors, and sat by his side at every council meeting. She had achieved her ambition, yet a gnawing emptiness persisted, a chilling sense of false security that she could not shake. She found herself constantly listening for the sound of the princess's bright laughter, which was now replaced by an unnatural silence. The king, though performing his royal duties, was a shadow of his former self. His joy had been stolen by grief. He often sat in the princess's former chambers, running a weary hand over her wooden toys and neatly folded robes. He blamed himself for not protecting her, for letting his queen convince him of the secret mission. His profound sadness was the very foundation upon which the queen's new life was built, and it began to erode her peace. The queen's torment began subtly. Freshly cooked meals would turn instantly cold the moment they touched her lips. Her most beloved perfumes would smell like ash and decay when she wore them. She sought out healers and priests, but they found no physical ailment. The affliction was intangible, spiritual. She would occasionally catch a fleeting scent of the night-blooming flower, a perfume that shouldn't exist in the palace. One evening, she hosted a grand feast to celebrate the kingdom's prosperity under her rule. As she raised her cup to toast the king, a cold wind, impossible indoors, swept through the hall, extinguishing all the torches. When they were relit, every flower on the table was withered and black, as if struck by a winter frost. The guests gasped, and fear, cold and sharp, replaced the celebratory warmth in the hall. The queen tried to maintain her composure, but she saw it. A fleeting shadow at the edge of the light, a shimmering echo of a young girl. The sight made her blood run cold, for she recognized the shape of the daughter she had murdered. She dismissed the event as a bad omen, but deep down, she knew the palace was no longer hers alone. The Princess Folake had silently entered the king's home, and the vengeance had begun. The princess's spirit, now skilled in subtle manipulation, focused her energy on the queen's prized possessions. She knew that the queen's vanity was her greatest weakness, and she struck there first. The queen's large, bronze mirror, where she admired her reflection daily, became the conduit for the spirit's truth. The king had gifted the mirror, declaring it reflected only beauty, a memory the spirit intended to corrupt. The queen stood before it one morning, adjusting her elaborate headdress, admiring the powerful, regal image she presented. Suddenly, the bronze surface rippled as if submerged in water. Her reflection dissolved, replaced by a ghastly, distorted image, a woman with eyes of pure malice, holding a bloody club. A silent scream escaped the queen's lips, her hands flying up to cover her mouth in shock. She stumbled back, breathing heavily, telling herself it was just a trick of the light, a momentary dizziness. But when she approached the mirror again, the reflection returned to normal, except for one chilling detail. For a fleeting second, the image of the princess's beautiful, accusing eyes flashed over her own. The queen spent the rest of the day in a cold sweat, unable to banish the vision of her own internal wickedness. This occurred repeatedly. Whenever the queen sought comfort in her reflection, the image of a blood-stained executioner or the princess's pale, spectral face would appear, whispering accusations only the queen could hear. Murderer! Traitor! The ancestors see your crime, the silent voices echoed in her mind. Sleep offered no escape. Her dreams were filled with the sound of leaves rustling and the sight of that small, forgotten grove. The queen began to waste away, her beauty fading as her guilt consumed her. She grew erratic and paranoid, refusing to look at reflective surfaces and snapping at servants for perceived slights. The palace staff whispered that the queen was being punished by a powerful, jealous curse, never dreaming the true source of her torment. The princess's revenge was perfectly calibrated, stripping the queen of the admiration and inner peace she had murdered for. Princess Folake knew she needed solid, physical proof to break through her father's grief and the queen's carefully constructed lies. She needed the testimony of the hunter, Ade, the only living person who knew the truth and held the exact location of her grave. She tracked his cowardly spirit using the faint echo of his guilt, following it to his remote, newly acquired land. Ade, though wealthy, lived a miserable life. The sight of the gold and the new land offered no joy. Every shadow held the shape of the princess. He suffered from feverish nightmares where the small dagger she had wielded appeared to grow larger and larger, threatening him. His conscience had become a prison worse than any cell in the king's dungeon. The princess's spirit focused her full power on him. She manifested entirely, appearing before him as he slept, her form glowing with the faint, ethereal light of the night-blooming flower. Her presence was cold, demanding, and utterly terrifying, freezing the very air in his hut. She didn't speak. She simply pointed a shimmering finger toward the direction of Ipioyo. Ade woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. He was no fool. He knew this was the spirit of the murdered princess, demanding justice. His fear of the angry spirit finally eclipsed his fear of the queen's retribution. He knew that only confessing the truth would free his tormented soul. The princess's silence spoke volumes, promising him a lifetime of torment if he did not go to the king. He packed only a small bag, leaving his ill-gotten wealth behind. It was cursed. With trembling resolve, Ade began the long journey back to the royal compound, prepared to face the king's wrath and end the spiritual nightmare that had consumed him. The truth, heavy as a boulder, was finally on its way home. Unseen, the princess's spirit shadowed him, ensuring he would not turn back or fall victim to any final, desperate act by the queen. Ade arrived at Ipooyo in the middle of a council meeting, his clothes torn, his face haggard, bursting into the hall with a desperate, primal scream. He collapsed at the feet of King Alyamide, startling the entire court. The queen, who had been sitting calmly beside the king, felt a cold dread clamp down on her heart. The king ordered the guards to seize him, demanding an explanation for the intrusion. Ade, sobbing uncontrollably, pointed a shaking finger at the queen. The princess. She is not lost to spirits. Your Majesty, she was murdered. By her, by Queen Folake. He confessed everything. The bribe, the mission, the location of the grove, the final, brutal blow, and the proof he had given the queen. The court erupted in shocked murmurs, but the king remained absolutely still, his mind struggling to process the impossible accusation. The queen's composure finally shattered. She screamed, denying everything, claiming Ade was a madman, a liar seeking vengeance. She tried to flee, but the king's head guard, acting on a lifetime of trust in their king, sealed the doors. The king, his eyes blazing with a dangerous mix of hope and terror, demanded the queen produce the necklace Ade described. He finally saw the darkness that had been hidden behind his wife's beautiful facade. The queen, cornered, realized her end had come. She pulled the unique, identifying necklace from a hidden pocket. She had kept it as a twisted trophy. She clutched it tight, her face contorted in a final snarl of jealousy. She took your love. She always took your love, she shrieked, confirming the truth of Ade's words. The king, seeing the proof, collapsed forward, his body shaking with a profound, agonizing grief that would bring tears to anyone who witnessed it. In that moment of ultimate, shattering truth, the ethereal form of Princess Folake appeared, not to attack, but to comfort. Her shimmering hand rested briefly on her father's shoulder. The king, amidst his tears, suddenly felt a warmth, a lightness, a fleeting scent of the night-blooming flower. He looked up, and for one clear, heartbreaking second, he saw his daughter, whole and beautiful, before she vanished. He knew then that his daughter had not just died, but had returned to save him. The king's anguish gave way to the cold, terrible duty of justice. He ordered the immediate arrest and imprisonment of the queen, who was dragged out, still screaming, by the royal guards. Ade, the hunter, was spared execution for his eventual confession, but was sentenced to a life of hard labor, forever cleansing the forest he had tainted. Justice in Oyo was swift and absolute. There was no forgiveness for the murder of a royal child. A royal delegation was sent immediately to the Forest of Whispers. Guided by Ade's detailed confession, they found the shallow grave beneath the Irako tree, and the king's darkest fears were confirmed. He personally supervised the recovery, his hands gently preparing his daughter for the funeral she deserved. He held the remnants of her small body, weeping for the years of her life that had been brutally stolen. The funeral for Princess Folake was the largest the kingdom had ever seen. Thousands of people wept openly for the lost princess, celebrating her pure spirit and mourning her tragic fate. The king, standing tall yet heartbroken, vowed that her memory would guide his reign forever. He decreed that a new law be written, protecting all children from the malice of others. The queen, stripped of all titles and power, was judged and found guilty of treason and royal murder. She was banished from the kingdom, forced to wander the desolate outskirts, a cautionary tale whispered to every child. Her fate was not quick death, but a lifetime of living with the knowledge that her jealousy had gained her nothing but universal scorn. She vanished into the wilderness, forever haunted by her crime and the loss of her soul. As the final funeral rites were performed, a magnificent white egret, a symbol of purity and the ancestors' blessing, flew overhead. The king looked up, a profound sense of peace finally settling over him. He knew his daughter's spirit was finally free, resting with her mother, her task completed. The spirit of Folake, the princess, had taken her vengeance not for hatred, but for the sake of the truth and her father's love, ensuring justice was the final, defining chapter. King Alyamide, though scarred by grief, found renewed strength in his duty and in the memory of his daughter's goodness. He ruled with wisdom and compassion, constantly guided by the purity of Princess Folake's heart. He honored her by funding projects that supported the kingdom's children and the study of traditional healing, just as she had wished. The kingdom, cleansed of the queen's evil, experienced an unprecedented era of peace and prosperity. The king never remarried. He devoted his life to his people, often telling the tale of his daughter, not as a tragedy, but as a testament to the power of truth over treachery. The story became a moral cornerstone of the kingdom, a reminder that the wicked may triumph for a time, but justice, spurred by love, will always prevail. The memory of the princess was immortalized, her story told around every village fire. Years passed, and the king grew old, beloved by his subjects. On his deathbed, he was calm and ready. He felt the cold air of the spirit world approaching, but this time, it was gentle and welcoming. He saw a familiar, beautiful light at the foot of his bed. He smiled, knowing his long-awaited reunion was at hand. Standing there was Princess Folake and her true mother, the first queen, both glowing with the warmth of the ancestors. They reached out their hands, their forms no longer spectral or sorrowful, but radiant and loving. The king took their hands, his last breath a sigh of profound contentment. The separation was over. The royal family was finally, eternally reunited. The reign continued under the king's chosen, honorable successor, carrying forward the legacy of truth and justice established by the princess's sacrifice. The kingdom of Oyo flourished, and every year, on the day of her great funeral, the people celebrated the princess who loved truth more than life itself. Her spirit had not rested until she took revenge, and in doing so, she brought eternal happiness and peace to her people. The tale of Princess Folake became a sweet, poignant lullaby, a happy ending forged from the deepest sorrow. Queen Folake, now stripped of her title and name, was thrust out into the vast, unforgiving savanna beyond Oyo's protective walls. She was alone, her luxurious silks turning to rags, her pampered skin quickly burned by the relentless sun. The silence of the open land, once a symbol of freedom, now felt like a suffocating judgment. Her banishment was worse than any execution. It was a slow, agonizing confrontation with her own conscience. She tried to beg for help in distant villages, but word of her crimes, the murder of the beloved princess, had traveled faster than she could walk. The people of the neighboring settlements treated her with a cold, fearful hostility, offering no food, no water, only turning their backs. She, who had craved admiration, was now the object of universal revulsion and scorn. The spirit of the true Princess Folake, having ensured justice for her father, did not entirely abandon her tormentor. She did not physically attack the banished queen, but ensured that the psychological torment Ade had experienced was amplified tenfold. The queen could never find peace, day or night. Every shadow seemed to shift, every gust of wind seemed to carry a whispered accusation. One night, huddled beneath a thorn bush, the queen saw the spectral form of the princess clearly for the first time since the palace. Folake stood before her, not raging, but with an expression of profound, pitying sadness. The queen screamed, clutching her head, begging the vision to leave. The vision vanished, but the message remained. The murdered girl would be her eternal shadow. Driven mad by hunger and the haunting, the banished queen resorted to stealing meager portions from unattended farm plots. Her regal hands, accustomed to receiving gifts, were now soiled by dirt and shame. The descent from royalty to outcast was complete, a fitting punishment for her insatiable greed. She realized that she had destroyed two lives, the princess's and her own. The princess's vengeance became more refined and focused on sensory deprivation. Whenever the banished queen would find a small moment of fleeting comfort, a sip of cool stream water, the warmth of a midday sun, the spirit would intervene. The cool water would instantly taste of bitter gall, and the sunlight would feel like searing heat. The most cruel torment was auditory. The queen constantly heard the distinct, clear sound of a young girl's joyous laughter, the very sound that had driven her to murder. It was always just beyond her field of vision, light and mocking. The laughter would intensify when the queen was weakest, driving her to cover her ears and sob uncontrollably. She sought refuge in the deep parts of the wilderness, hoping to escape the human world and the spectral torment. But even amongst the rocks and wild animals, she found no solace. The echoes followed her into every secluded cave, into every deserted valley. She tried to physically lash out at the sound, tearing her hair and screaming into the empty sky, but hit only air. The queen began talking to herself constantly, debating with the spectral voice and the laughter, trying to justify her actions. It was his fault. He loved her more. I deserved the power, she would shriek, her voice hoarse and broken. She was losing her grip on reality, her mind fracturing under the weight of guilt and supernatural assault. One day, she found a small, rusted mirror abandoned near an old trade road. Desperate for a glimpse of her former self, she lifted it. Instead of her own haggard face, the mirror showed the princess's youthful reflection, perfectly serene. The queen flung the mirror away, howling, understanding that her beauty and her sanity were both gone forever. The revenge was complete. The queen was left with nothing but the truth and the ghost of the one she envied. The banished Queen Folake often found herself on the desolate, shimmering horizons of the savannah. Her mind, ravaged by exposure and guilt, started projecting illusions, cruel tricks of the light designed by her fractured psyche and the princess's subtle influence. The heat would often coalesce into a beautiful, cool lake surrounded by lush fruit trees, promising respite and water. Driven by desperate thirst, she would race toward the mirage, her cracked feet bleeding on the hard, dry ground. She would arrive at the spot only to find nothing but hot sand and rocks, the phantom lake dissolving before her eyes. Each false hope was a devastating psychological blow, crushing her will to survive. Once, the mirage was an entire royal pavilion, shimmering gold and purple, complete with servants bowing and offering her chilled calabashes of water. The queen cried out her own name, reaching for the impossible vision of her lost life. As she reached, the vision was instantly replaced by the terrifying, accusing face of the Princess Folake. The queen collapsed, realizing that her spirit was actively working against her. The princess was not allowing her even the smallest, fleeting comfort that the living world offered. She was condemned to a relentless, unquenchable craving for what she could not have. The torment was so exquisite because it preyed directly on her greatest vice, desire. She began to understand that the spirit of the murdered girl was more powerful than any king. The princess was not killing her with a blow, but slowly, meticulously, killing her with truth and memory. This realization plunged her into a deeper state of despair. She wished for death, but the princess's will kept her barely clinging to life, ensuring the maximum suffering. Desperate for a sign of relief, the banished queen resorted to the ancient ways, attempting to make an offering to the spirits to beg for release. She painstakingly gathered a small, bruised papaya and some wild nuts, placing them on a flat stone. She prostrated herself before the meager altar, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her cheeks. She pleaded with the spirits of the ancestors, swearing that she had repented, promising to live a life of humility if they would only lift the curse of the haunting laughter and the mirages. Her voice was weak, cracked with thirst, and utterly defeated. Her plea lacked true contrition. It was merely a desperate negotiation for her own comfort. Unseen, the spirit of Princess Folake hovered above the offering. With a wave of pure, chilling energy, the fruit on the stone instantly blackened and turned to dust, and the nuts crumbled into bitter ash. The message was clear. Her offering was rejected. Her soul was too corrupted to be accepted by the righteous ancestors. A single, crystalline drop of water, appearing impossibly from the dry air, fell onto the stone altar. It immediately evaporated with a sharp hiss. The queen watched this display of power, her last vestige of hope dissolving into spiritual terror. The princess had demonstrated that her power was absolute, even over the elements. The queen crawled away from the desecrated altar, her faith in everything broken. She was cursed, rejected by both the living and the spirit world, condemned to wander the earth until her penance was complete, a fate determined by the girl she had sought to erase. The weight of her crime had become a visible, physical burden, bending her frame. Back in the palace, King Alyamide had withdrawn into a period of deep self-reflection following the banishment of the queen. He was now a figure of profound sorrow and quiet dignity, the flash of youthful zeal replaced by measured, careful wisdom. He dismissed his most extravagant robes, wearing simple, indigo-dyed cotton as a sign of his continued mourning and humility. He spent hours in his daughter's former chambers, not crying, but simply sitting on the floor, absorbing the memory of her innocent life. He had the room sealed to preserve its contents exactly as she had left them, a private shrine to his lost joy. He kept her last, unfinished carving, a small wooden gazelle, on his desk, touching it before every royal decree. The king's pain was not a weakness. It became the source of his strength. He governed with unprecedented empathy, understanding that suffering was a universal truth. His judgments were now tempered by mercy, but backed by unwavering demands for honesty and transparency. He learned to value truth above all things, a lesson paid for with his daughter's life. He established a system where any commoner could approach him directly with a grievance, bypassing the corrupt bureaucracy that had allowed the queen's plot to unfold unseen. He sat for hours every day, listening intently to the voices of his people. He was rebuilding the kingdom's trust, one honest conversation at a time. The people, witnessing their king's genuine remorse and dedicated effort, responded with overwhelming loyalty. The tragedy had bound them to him in a way prosperity never could. They wept for the princess, but they adored the king she had saved. The dark chapter was slowly closing, replaced by the warmth of collective healing. The king frequently sought the company of the ancient wise woman, Yowanda, who had been Folake's mentor. She was the spiritual conduit for the kingdom, possessing eyes that saw beyond the veil of the physical world. She did not offer platitudes. She offered hard truths about the balance between life, death, and justice. Yowanda assured the king that Folake's spirit was no longer angry, but was now a powerful, peaceful presence guiding the kingdom. She bought your kingdom's soul with her life, my king, she told him softly. Do not let the price be wasted. She emphasized that the spirit's revenge was driven by a need for justice, not hatred. She taught the king rituals to honor the ancestors and to purify the palace from the taint of the queen's evil. Together, they oversaw the ceremonial burning of all the queen's remaining possessions, symbolically cleansing the royal house. The smoke rose high above the palace, a visual declaration of freedom from treachery. Yowanda also helped the king find peace regarding the fate of the banished queen. The spirits know her location, she explained. She carries her own punishment, far heavier than any chain. Your heart must be free of the hatred she left behind. The king realized that focusing on the queen's demise was only giving her crime continued power over him. This counsel freed the king. He decided to focus entirely on rebuilding. He vowed to never speak the banished queen's name again, declaring her a non-entity whose only purpose was to serve as a dark backdrop for the brilliance of his daughter. He released his personal vengeance, dedicating his energy fully to his daughter's legacy. The Garden of Truth, built where the princess's empty tomb had once stood, was now flourishing. The Irako sapling, planted by the king, had taken root and was growing vigorously, its new leaves a bright, hopeful green against the ancient stone. The garden was situated in a part of the palace grounds that had felt cold and neglected during the queen's presence. Local herbalists and gardeners dedicated themselves to making the garden a sanctuary of rare, beautiful indigenous plants. They included every flower and herb that the Princess Folake had loved or studied under the tutelage of Yowanda. The air in the garden was perpetually sweet, a healing balm for the king and his people. The king made it a daily routine to walk through the garden at dawn, watering the Irako tree himself. He often talked to the tree, sharing his hopes for the kingdom, feeling a profound sense of communion with his daughter's eternal presence. It was his personal church, a place where grief and hope met in perfect balance. Children were encouraged to use the garden for quiet study and play, ensuring that the princess's memory was always associated with life, growth, and joy, not just with her tragic end. Their innocent laughter finally restored true happiness to the palace grounds. The echoes of the true Folake's laughter, unlike the phantom laughter tormenting her stepmother, were now real and purifying. The king commissioned a stone plaque for the garden entrance, inscribed with a single, powerful line. The light you seek is the truth you carry. This became the silent motto of his restored and purified kingdom. The garden was a physical manifestation of the princess's spiritual triumph over treachery. The first anniversary of the day the truth was revealed, the day of the queen's confession, was approaching. King Alyamide refused to observe it as a day of mourning, instead declaring it a day of remembrance and renewal. He wanted the kingdom to look forward, not back into the shadow. He held a huge, public feast, not of opulence, but of sharing. Everyone, from the highest noble to the poorest farmer, ate together in the great market square. It was a symbolic act of unity, showing that the palace would never again be isolated from its people. The shared meal was a metaphor for the shared truth that had saved them. The king himself served the meal to the common folk, humbling himself before his subjects. The sight of their king, working with dignity and sorrow, brought many to tears, solidifying their respect and love for the now righteous ruler. This was the true healing of the kingdom, the king earning back the trust he had inadvertently forfeited. He formally announced the creation of the Festival of Light and Truth, to be held every year on the day of the princess's burial, dedicating it to children and honest justice. He placed Yawanda, the wise woman, in charge of establishing the traditions. He was institutionalizing his daughter's legacy, making it impossible to forget. That night, as the king slept peacefully for the first time in many months, he dreamed of his daughter. She did not speak, but merely pointed toward the morning sun, her expression radiant with approval. The king awoke with a sense of purpose and a profound, quiet happiness. The spirit had given her final, personal blessing to her father's renewed reign. The hunter, Ade, still serving his sentence of hard labor, was now an old man, his body bent, but his spirit slowly mending. He had worked diligently, planting crops and digging wells for the community, his remorse serving as his daily whip. He rarely spoke, his silence a deep acknowledgement of the wrong he had done. One scorching afternoon, while working alone on a fallow field, he heard the faint, chilling laughter, the spectral sound that had haunted him for years. He dropped his hoe and fell to his knees, bracing for the terror. He cried out, "I have repented. Let me finish my days in peace." Instead of the agonizing noise, a gentle warmth settled over him. The laughter did not mock, it seemed to fade, replaced by the soft whisper of the wind carrying a note of pure, resonant forgiveness. The princess's spirit had finally released him from his torment, having judged his penance complete. Ade stood up, gasping. The air around him felt clean, light, and free of the heavy guilt he had carried. His eyes, though old, sparkled with a profound relief. The fever of his soul had broken, the haunting was over. He realized that the princess's mercy was as limitless as her anger had been focused. He finished his day's work with renewed vigor, now working not out of fear, but out of genuine, purified devotion to the king and the memory of the girl he had wronged. He would soon be free, truly free. The spirit's revenge was never just about punishment. It was about forcing redemption. Far away, the banished Queen Folake was nearing the end of her tortured wandering. She was a skeletal wreck, barely recognizable as a human being, her mind now a continuous kaleidoscope of terrifying images and sounds. She had not eaten a substantial meal in weeks, living only on her stubborn hatred and the sheer force of the curse. Her final, most elaborate hallucination began. She saw a vast, beautiful palace, grander than Ipioyo, and a crowd of subjects kneeling before her, chanting her name. Queen Folake. Queen Folake. She staggered towards the vision, believing her banishment was over. The illusion was designed to give her the one thing she had craved most, unquestioned adoration. She ascended the illusory throne, a tattered, broken figure sitting where royalty should have been. As the phantom crowd bowed, they began to sing a lullaby, the very song the first queen used to sing to her daughter. The triumphant illusion instantly dissolved into pure spiritual agony. The queen was left sitting alone on the bare ground, surrounded only by the mocking silence of the wilderness. She screamed, realizing that her spirit had manufactured the perfect, final torture, giving her the peak of her desire, only to rip it away with the pure memory of the innocent she had killed. She finally broke, her mind unable to withstand the contradiction between her fantasy and the terrible truth. She began to laugh, a high, manic, broken sound that echoed the very spectral laughter that had driven her mad. The laughter stopped abruptly as her exhausted body gave out. finally succumbing to the vengeance she had earned. Her spirit did not find rest. It was dragged into the darkness, a consequence of her unrepentant heart. The moment the banished queen died, King Alyamide was standing by the Irako sapling in the Garden of Truth. A profound sense of lightness, unlike any he had felt since the tragedy, swept over him. It was as if a heavy, invisible chain had been lifted from the kingdom's collective spirit. He looked up at the sun, and for a fleeting moment, he saw the faint, shimmering outline of his daughter, standing high in the branches of the growing Irako tree. She looked radiant, her head turned toward the horizon where her stepmother had met her end. She offered a final, serene nod, a silent message that the chapter of vengeance was closed. The king understood instantly that the queen was gone and that his daughter's spirit was finally free of the duty of torment. He wept tears of relief, not for the queen, but for the peaceful release of his beloved child. He felt a profound gratitude for the terrible justice that had secured his future. He called for a gathering of the council, not to announce the death, but to declare a day of cleansing and forgiveness for the kingdom, urging his people to release all lingering bitterness associated with the past. The king demonstrated his own spiritual freedom by refusing to celebrate his enemy's demise. The king then took a golden cup of fresh water and poured it over the Irako sapling's roots, an act of blessing and eternal farewell to the struggle. His heart, though forever scarred, was finally, truly at peace. The darkness was extinguished. The work of healing could now proceed unimpeded. Months later, the first official festival of light and truth was held, exactly 1 year after the princess's remains were laid to rest. The mood was solemn, yet powerfully optimistic, focusing entirely on the future. The entire kingdom participated, showing a unity that had been fractured for years. Wise woman Yawanda led the ceremonies, guiding the people through the history, emphasizing Folake's courage. She instructed every family to share a truthful story from their own lives, encouraging honest communication across generations. The festival served as a powerful tool for social and moral repair. As dusk fell, King Alyamide ascended the royal platform, his face alight with pride and sorrow. He spoke of his daughter, not focusing on her death, but on the profound life she had lived and the eternal truth she had championed. His speech was heartfelt, tear-jerking, a king bearing his soul to his people. He then introduced the tradition of the lanterns. Thousands of small clay lamps were lit, creating a sea of gentle, warm light across the sprawling compound. The sight was spectacular, moving the king and the crowd to emotional silence. As the first lantern ascended, a collective gasp of awe and catharsis swept through the people. The king watched the lanterns drift toward the heavens, each one carrying a wish for truth and justice, a physical representation of his daughter's ascending spirit. He knew the kingdom was now whole, dedicated to the light Folake represented. The era of darkness was truly over. The kingdom of Oyo had been reborn in the light of truth. Following the immense success of the inaugural festival, the king formalized its structures. He created a royal academy of truth, dedicated to training the brightest young minds in law, history, and spiritual ethics, ensuring the rule of law was always just. The princess's passion for learning became the foundation of the kingdom's greatest institution. He ensured that the story of the Folakes, the true and the treacherous, was taught to every child from the earliest age, not as mere entertainment, but as the central moral compass of their culture. The tale became the fundamental moral text, guaranteeing that jealousy and deceit would always be recognized and condemned. The king's wisdom grew to legendary status. His reign was marked by stability and righteousness, proving to all neighboring kingdoms that justice, even born from tragedy, leads to lasting peace. Oyo became known not for its military strength, but for the purity of its governance. He commissioned a final, definitive account of the events, ensuring that future generations would not distort the truth. This royal document became known as the Scroll of Eternal Light, detailing the spirit's vengeance and the subsequent cleansing of the throne. His work of healing was meticulous and absolute, leaving no room for future shadows. King Alyamide, now an admired, mature ruler, looked upon his flourishing kingdom and knew his daughter's sacrifice had not been in vain. The kingdom was happy, safe, and morally sound, a legacy more precious than any crown. His life, though marked by sorrow, was culminating in the greatest happy ending a king could achieve, a prosperous, righteous future for his people. King Aljamaid, now entering his golden years, had become known across the land as Aljamaid the Wise. His face bore the dignified marks of a life deeply lived and a sorrow bravely overcome. His hair was now white as the egret's feathers, but his eyes retained the keen, unwavering light of a man who had stared into darkness and chosen the sun. His reputation for fairness was legendary. Even neighboring enemies sought his arbitration. He governed with a calm authority, seldom needing to raise his voice. His presence alone commanded respect, a reverence earned not just through his title, but through his transparency regarding the palace's most painful chapter. He taught his advisors that a wise ruler must first be a wounded healer. The annual Festival of Light and Truth grew larger and more significant each year. The sight of thousands of lanterns ascending into the night sky was no longer just a ceremony. It was the spiritual heartbeat of the nation, a collective oath to honesty. The king would watch from his throne, tears of profound satisfaction welling in his eyes. He continued his solitary visits to the Garden of Truth, often sitting quietly by the now large Irako tree. The tree, tall and strong, was a living memorial to his daughter, a testament to how even the most brutal violence could yield enduring beauty. He would speak softly to the leaves, updating Folake on the kingdom's happiness. The king's greatest pride was in the Royal Academy of Truth, where young scholars debated law and ethics with a passion fueled by the princess's story. He ensured that the first lesson taught was always the scroll of eternal light, the full, unvarnished truth of the murder and the vengeance. He was building a legacy that transcended bloodline, a legacy of principle. Recognizing his advanced age, King Aljamaid began the delicate process of selecting a successor. He had no other children, and the painful events had taught him that blood connection did not guarantee a righteous heart. He announced he would choose a leader based on character, wisdom, and devotion to the scrolls of truth. He chose an elder named Ao, a man who had been a loyal advisor since before the tragedy, known for his unshakable integrity and gentle spirit. Ao possessed the humility the king had learned through suffering. Ao wept when offered the position, swearing to uphold the princess's legacy above all else. He governed with a calm authority, seldom needing to raise his voice. His presence alone commanded respect, a reverence earned not just through his title, but through his transparency regarding the palace's most painful chapter. He taught his advisors that a wise ruler must first be a wounded healer. The annual Festival of Light and Truth grew larger and more significant each year. The sight of thousands of lanterns ascending into the night sky was no longer just a ceremony. It was the spiritual heartbeat of the nation, a collective oath to honesty. The king would watch from his throne, tears of profound satisfaction welling in his eyes. He continued his solitary visits to the Garden of Truth, often sitting quietly by the now large Irako tree. The tree, tall and strong, was a living memorial to his daughter, a testament to how even the most brutal violence could yield enduring beauty. He would speak softly to the leaves, updating Folake on the kingdom's happiness. The king's greatest pride was in the Royal Academy of Truth, where young scholars debated law and ethics with a passion fueled by the princess's story. He ensured that the first lesson taught was always the scroll of eternal light, the full, unvarnished truth of the murder and the vengeance. He was building a legacy that transcended bloodline, a legacy of principle. Recognizing his advanced age, King Aljamaid began the delicate process of selecting a successor. He had no other children, and the painful events had taught him that blood connection did not guarantee a righteous heart. He announced he would choose a leader based on character, wisdom, and devotion to the scrolls of truth. He chose an elder named Ao, a man who had been a loyal advisor since before the tragedy, known for his unshakable integrity and gentle spirit. Ao possessed the humility the king had learned through suffering. Ao wept when offered the position, swearing to uphold the princess's legacy above all else. The king spent months meticulously training Ao, focusing less on military strategy and more on judicial empathy. He took him to the Garden of Truth, sharing the most intimate details of his grief and the spiritual lessons Folake had imparted. The training was a passing of the torch of sorrow and wisdom, not just a crown. The kingdom accepted the choice with peace, recognizing that the king was prioritizing the moral purity of the throne over tradition. They trusted Alyamide the Wise implicitly, knowing his decision was guided by his daughter's spirit. The seamless transition of power was yet another victory over the chaos the envious queen had sown. With his successor secured and his moral legacy enshrined, the king felt a profound peace settle over him. His duty to the living was nearly complete, and his heart was turning toward the long-awaited reunion with his wife and child. The light in his eyes was growing softer, more ethereal, anticipating the spiritual journey ahead. The story of Princess Folake and the vengeful spirit was no longer just history. It was woven into the fabric of the people's daily lives. Griots, storytellers, composed epic poems and songs detailing the cinematic events. One popular song, The Lantern's Truth, became a standard lullaby, replacing fear with moral strength. The emotional core of the tale, the king's devastating grief, the queen's blinding jealousy, and the spirit's heartbreaking justice, moved listeners to tears every time. The story served as a constant, potent emotional reminder of the consequences of sin. The sorrow was therapeutic, a shared, cathartic experience that continually cleansed the community. In the Royal Academy of Truth, student actors staged yearly theatrical productions of the princess's final days, always emphasizing her innocence and her spirit's powerful return. The role of Folake, the princess, was the most coveted, played only by students of the highest moral standing. The arts became a vessel for preserving the kingdom's ethical foundation. The king attended every performance, always sitting in the front row, openly displaying his tears. He wanted his people to see that true strength was found in acknowledging pain and learning from it, not in hiding it. His public vulnerability was his greatest source of political and spiritual power. The kingdom was happy, but their happiness was weighted with the knowledge of sorrow. It was an enduring, resilient joy, tempered by the unforgettable price paid for their peace. A joy that would never again be taken for granted. The final revenge of the spirit was securing this profound, enduring cultural maturity. The hunter, Ade, now a free man, lived out his days serving the kingdom in humble silence. He was appointed the official custodian of the Forest of Whispers, ensuring the sanctity of the ground he had once defiled. He viewed the appointment not as a job, but as an eternal penance. He spent his time repairing paths, guiding lost travelers safely around the deep parts of the forest, and ensuring no one trespassed near the sacred Irako Grove. He never spoke of his past, but his dedication was visible in every careful step he took. He wore the small wooden gazelle carving, the princess's forgiveness, on a leather cord around his neck. The children, who knew his story from the tales and songs, treated him with a respectful distance, understanding that he was a living, walking example of redemption. He was a symbol that even great wickedness could be forgiven through true repentance. His life became a crucial part of the moral tapestry of the kingdom. Ade often visited the Irako tree, kneeling in quiet reverence. He would leave offerings of fresh water and sweet fruits, not out of fear, but out of genuine, purified love for the girl whose death had saved his soul. He had gone from the princess's killer to her lifelong, silent guardian. His quiet service was a source of great comfort to the aging King Alyamide. Knowing that the last living soul connected to the crime had found peace through dedicated service was the final confirmation that justice had triumphed fully. The king saw Ade's redemption as a final, beautiful gift from his daughter's spirit. King Alyamide spent his final years working on a single, crowning artistic endeavor, an epic poem dedicated to his daughter, titled The Light Bearer. It was a massive work, detailing his entire life and the ultimate lessons learned. It was intended to be the spiritual guide for Ao and all future monarchs. He wrote with a clarity and power born of his decades of suffering and eventual peace. He described the initial blinding beauty of the envious queen, the shock of the truth, and the awe-inspiring spectral vengeance. The poem was agonizingly honest, sparing no detail of his own failings as a husband and a father. The climax of the poem was the moment the princess's spirit appeared to him after the queen's confession, a vision of pure, comforting light. He described the feeling of her spectral hand on his shoulder, a touch that brought both tears and deliverance. It was a lyrical, tear-jerking testament to the power of love that transcends death. He finished the poem not long before his final illness began. He gathered his advisors and successor, reading the final stanza aloud, his voice trembling with emotion but ringing with conviction. The last line was, "And though the night was long, the morning star, my Folake, shone brighter still." The reading left the room in stunned silence, punctuated only by quiet sobs. They realized they had not just heard a poem, but the absolute truth and final testament of their king's noble heart. It was his final, powerful act of love. His emotional vulnerability cemented his legacy as the greatest king in Oyo's history. Shortly after completing his epic poem, King Olyamide's health began its slow, inevitable decline. It was a gentle fading, not a violent end, a quiet surrender to age and the completion of his life's monumental work. He took to his bed, surrounded by the quiet reverence of his closest servants and the wise woman, Yawanda. The entire kingdom entered a silent vigil. People gathered outside the palace gates, sitting quietly on mats, praying, singing the songs of Folake softly, sending their collective love to the old king. The emotional bond between the ruler and the ruled had never been stronger. King Olyamide received visitors, not to conduct business, but to say farewell. He held hands, offered blessings, and shared final words of wisdom, always reminding them to follow the precepts of the scroll of eternal light. His chamber became a site of quiet pilgrimage, radiating peace and finality. He kept only two things near him: the small, unfinished wooden gazelle carving made by the princess, and a fresh vase of the night-blooming flowers, brought secretly by Ade from the forest. He spent hours gazing at the flower, a beautiful, fragrant symbol of the love that awaits him. The king was ready. He had secured his kingdom, appointed his successor, and finally found peace with his devastating loss. He longed now only for the reunion with the two women whose love defined his life. His death would not be a tragedy, but a well-earned, beautiful homecoming. As his strength waned, the king gave his final personal decree. The first queen's chambers, which had been empty and sealed for decades, must be perfectly restored to their original state. He wanted the room to be a place of pure, untainted memory for his final passage. The servants, working with tearful reverence, stripped away the layers of time, restoring the colors, the tapestries, and the furniture exactly as the first queen had loved them. The room glowed with a soft, peaceful elegance. It was an act of love, ensuring his wife was honored one last time. He was moved into the restored chambers, where the scent of his first love, her favorite subtle perfume, seemed to linger gently in the air. This was where he had found his greatest joy, and where he would find his final rest. He looked around, a faint smile touching his lips, feeling her presence surrounding him. He asked for the small, carved cradle he and his wife had prepared for Folake's birth to be placed by his bedside. He reached out and touched the worn wood, remembering the promise of a perfect future that had been stolen and then redeemed. The simple gesture was agonizingly beautiful, a man revisiting his happiest memory before death. The king lay there, comforted by the palpable memory of his wife and the knowledge of his daughter's love. He was surrounded by peace, waiting patiently for the moment he would join them both in the ancestral realm. The room was a sacred space, prepared for the most glorious of all reunions. Successor Ao, along with wise woman Yawanda, came to the king's bedside for the final spiritual rites. The atmosphere was one of solemn celebration, not sorrow, recognizing the great journey the king had completed. Ao knelt, his eyes red, knowing he was witnessing a truly royal passage. The king reached a trembling hand out and placed it on Ao's head, performing the ancient blessing of succession. His voice was barely a whisper, but his command was clear and absolute. Lead with the light, Ao, never with the shadow. Your strength is the truth. Yawanda then took a calabash of pure, sacred water and sprinkled it gently over the king's feet and head, cleansing him for the journey home. She chanted the names of his ancestors, preparing the path for his soul. The ritual was profoundly moving, a deep respect for both the living and the dead. The king closed his eyes and whispered two names, one after the other, in a voice filled with love and longing. Folake, my Folake. He was addressing both his wife and his daughter, calling them to him. The sound of the names brought fresh tears to the eyes of all present, a beautiful, final expression of his enduring love. The final blessing was complete. Ao rose, his face etched with determination and sorrow, now officially king in all but name. He left the chambers, leaving the old king to his final, sacred solitude. The kingdom was secure. The king's final gift was peace. The king had commissioned a final portrait of his daughter years prior, demanding that the artist not paint her as a queen or a victim, but simply as a young girl radiating purity and intelligence. The painting was finished and brought into the restored chambers, placed where the king could see it clearly. The portrait showed Princess Folake with a gentle, knowing smile. She wore simple robes and held a small, smooth stone, a memory of the earth, in her hand. Her eyes were painted with an astonishing light, seeming to look right into her father's soul. It captured her essence, the innocent kindness that had spurred her spirit's just vengeance. King Alyamide spent his last waking hours gazing at the portrait. He did not see a dead child. He saw his living, eternal daughter, waiting patiently for him on the other side. The image brought him immense comfort, dissolving the last threads of his earthly sadness. He gently instructed a nearby attendant to place the small wooden gazelle carving at the foot of the portrait, uniting the two symbols of his daughter's life and legacy. It was the final arrangement of his life's treasures. He ensured that the artistic representation matched the spiritual reality of her triumph. With his eyes fixed on the pure, comforting gaze of his daughter in the painting, the king closed them for the last time. He had finally found the peace that Folake had died to secure for him. He drifted into a gentle slumber, ready to cross the boundary into the light he had spent decades chasing. The moment of King Alyamide's death was marked by a sudden, intense warmth that filled the restored chambers, replacing the coolness of the night air. The subtle scent of the night-blooming flower became overwhelmingly sweet, then faded. The spiritual world was making its presence known, welcoming a righteous soul home. The wise woman, Yawanda, was the only one present. She watched as the king's face transformed in death, the lines of worry and sorrow smoothing away, leaving an expression of profound, youthful joy. It was a transformation that transcended grief. It was pure, absolute happiness. Yawanda reached out and gently closed the king's eyes. She knew, with the certainty of her spiritual sight, that he had not died alone, but had been met at the threshold by his loved ones. She whispered, "Go with light, Alyamide. Your Folake's wait." She then stepped out of the chambers and, with a heavy heart but a resolute voice, announced the passing of King Alyamide the Wise to the waiting court and the silent crowd outside the palace gates. The kingdom released a collective wail of sorrow, quickly followed by a determined chant of his name and his daughter's legacy. The king had achieved his ultimate happy ending. The sorrow of his life had been transmuted into the eternal joy of reunion, and his reign had secured the moral future of his people through the ultimate power of his daughter's courageous, loving spirit. The vengeful spirit's work was complete, love had won, and the king was finally home. The funeral of King Alyamide was not a spectacle of earthly wealth, but a grand spiritual celebration. It was held on the same grounds as the Garden of Truth, beneath the spreading canopy of the Irako tree, which had grown magnificent over the years, mirroring the growth of the king's wisdom. The entire kingdom attended, creating a sea of white and indigo, colors of mourning and spiritual purity. His body, dressed in the simple robes of a wise man, was laid in state. The scroll of eternal light and the unfinished wooden gazelle carving were placed beside him, the symbols of his greatest sorrow and his ultimate victory. The scent of the night-blooming flower, brought from the forest, filled the air, a final, tangible sign of the spirit's love. Successor King Ao presided, weeping openly but leading the ceremony with dignity. He read the final stanza of Alyamide's great poem, his voice cracking with emotion as he recited the lines about Folake, the morning star. The sheer honesty and emotional power of the moment moved the entire crowd to simultaneous, cathartic weeping. Wise woman Yawanda oversaw the spiritual rites, ensuring the king's path was clear to the ancestors. She spoke of how Alyamide had redeemed his throne through truth, becoming one of the most beloved and righteous rulers in their history, thanks to his daughter's sacrifice. She declared that the king and his two Folakes were finally a complete family in the spirit world. King Alyamide was buried beside the tomb of his first queen, their resting places side by side, leaving a symbolic space between them for the eternal presence of the Princess Folake. The stone carving over their tombs bore a single emblem. The kingdom had laid its great king to rest, secure in the knowledge that justice and love prevail. King Ao's coronation was held immediately after the funeral rites, a powerful symbol of stability and continuity. He wore the simple crown, rejecting the excessive ornamentation of the past, embracing the humble legacy of Aljamaid the Wise. His first act was not a show of military strength, but a powerful decree honoring his predecessor. He declared that the Festival of Light and Truth would be expanded into a week-long national holiday, dedicated not only to justice, but to the preservation of memory. Every citizen was mandated to commit to memory a portion of the scroll of eternal light. This was a political move designed to embed the princess's story permanently into the national identity. Ao immediately signed an order for the construction of a magnificent, circular monument in the main square of Ipioyo. It would be a permanent, awe-inspiring tribute to Princess Folake. He wanted her image to be the first and last thing travelers saw when entering the capital. He appointed Ade, the redeemed hunter, to be the lifetime royal steward of the Garden of Truth, giving him the honor of tending the king's final resting place and the Irako tree. This symbolic act of forgiveness cemented the kingdom's commitment to mercy alongside justice. King Ao governed with a steady hand, constantly consulting the wisdom found in Aljamaid's epic poem and the scroll of eternal light. He understood that the foundation of his throne was laid not in conquest, but in sorrow and truth. The king's reign began in the light cast by a vengeful, loving spirit. The Princess Folake's monument was finally unveiled to the kingdom in a grand ceremony. It was a spectacular sculpture of pure white marble, carved by the kingdom's greatest artists. It depicted Folake as a young woman, strong and serene, with a book of knowledge in one hand and her gaze fixed resolutely on the horizon. Crucially, the statue was designed to face toward the forest of whispers, symbolizing her courage and the direction from which her truth emerged. It was positioned on a stepped pedestal, representing her ascent from victim to spiritual guardian. The effect was breathtaking, inspiring reverence in all who saw it. The inscription on the pedestal was simple: Folake, truth does not rest. This phrase became the unofficial motto of the kingdom, a constant reminder to seek clarity and shun deceit. The statue was more than art. It was a spiritual and moral pillar for the entire nation. During the unveiling, a sudden, soft wind carrying the powerful scent of the night-blooming flowers swept through the crowd, causing people to gasp and exchange emotional glances. They knew the spirit was present, giving her final blessing. The cinematic moment reaffirmed the people's belief in the princess's eternal watchfulness. King Ao knelt before the monument, making a public vow that the kingdom would remain forever faithful to the principles the princess's sacrifice had established. He rose to the sound of thunderous applause, confirming the legitimacy of his rule through Folake's legacy. The final memorial was secured, immortalizing her triumph over jealousy. The influence of the princess's story was most potent in the next generation. Children grew up deeply familiar with the tale, and they actively participated in preserving her legacy. The fear of the envious queen was replaced by a reverence for the purity of the princess. In the schools and the Academy of Truth, the children annually performed the Children's Vow, where they pledged never to succumb to jealousy, never to tell a malicious lie, and always to protect the vulnerable. The emotional intensity of this vow, spoken by hundreds of innocent voices, was often overwhelming. The name Folake became the most popular name for girls across the kingdom, a symbol of hope and inherited kindness. Mothers proudly told their daughters, "You carry the light of the princess." The kingdom was actively healing its past by investing its hope in its future. Children would often leave small, handmade wooden carvings, similar to the gazelle, at the base of the princess's monument, tiny offerings of innocence and gratitude to the girl who had saved their kingdom. The monument was never without these humble tributes, proving the enduring power of her story. King Ao observed this from afar, realizing that the spirit's vengeance had not resulted in a legacy of fear, but a legacy of profound moral discipline and love. This, he knew, was the greatest happy ending of all. The kingdom was structurally, morally, and spiritually sound, unbreakable by future malice. Years passed, turning King Ao's reign into a period of deep stability and cultural flourishing. The kingdom of Oyo was renowned far and wide for its justice system, its wisdom, and its spiritual integrity. Traders and diplomats traveled from distant lands, seeking not gold, but the wisdom of the scroll of eternal light. The story of the two Folakes was no longer just a local tale. It became an international proverb. Foreign rulers used it to caution their own courts against the dangers of unchecked envy and deceit. The princess's tale had become a tool for global moral governance. The symbol of the Irako tree and the lantern, which King Alyamide had placed on his tomb, became the official emblem of the Oyo royal house, replacing the older symbols of military might. The kingdom declared that its strength lay in its moral fortitude, not its weapons. The new generation of griots would tell the story of the vengeance not as a horror, but as a demonstration of divine justice and the ultimate power of good over evil. The narrative was meticulously preserved, its emotional impact never diminished. The cinematic quality of the story ensured its eternal power to move hearts. Oyo became known as the Kingdom of the Eternal Light, a direct and lasting tribute to the spirit of Princess Folake, the girl whose life, death, and spectral return had purified the royal line and secured centuries of peace. The kingdom's prosperity was the final, undeniable proof of the spirit's successful mission. Wise woman Yowanda, having fulfilled her duty to the king and the princess's spirit, eventually grew frail and ready for her own final journey. She was revered as a saint, the physical link to the magical events of the past. She passed on her knowledge to a chosen, equally righteous apprentice, ensuring the spiritual guardianship of the kingdom would continue. Her final request was to be laid to rest in the Garden of Truth, close to the Irako tree and the tombs of King Alyamide and his first queen. King Ao immediately granted the honor. She wanted to remain spiritually close to the righteous souls she had guided. The day of her burial was marked by an astonishing natural event. The Irako tree, though not in season, produced a single, brilliant branch of its rarest bloom, showering the wise woman's grave with fragrant petals. It was interpreted as a final, beautiful welcoming from the ancestors and the princess. Yowanda's apprentice, now the new wise woman, announced that Yowanda would join Folake's mother as a protector of the royal family in the spirit world, ensuring the throne would always be guided by female wisdom and moral strength. The spiritual architecture of the kingdom was now complete, strong, and divinely sanctioned. The memory of Yowanda, the wise woman, was woven into the story, completing the cast of heroes who stood against the queen's treachery. Her life was another happy ending achieved through steadfast dedication to the truth. The kingdom celebrated her life as another chapter in the scroll of eternal light. Generations continued to pass, and the market square of Ipioyo, the heartbeat of the capital, remained a place of vibrancy and justice. Disputes were settled swiftly and fairly, based on the principle of truth established by the princess. There was a palpable sense of community and trust that permeated every transaction. The children who were named Folake would gather in the square, sitting by the grand white statue of the princess, listening to the griots tell the epic tale again and again. The emotional weight of the story never faded, continuing to bring a sharp, cleansing sorrow to the listeners. Every storyteller would end the narrative with the scene of the king's final reunion, painting a cinematic picture of the three spirits embracing in the golden light of the ancestral realm. The ending was always powerful, tear-jerking, and ultimately, deeply satisfying. The elders would smile, watching the children, knowing that the spirit's vengeance was not a curse on the land, but a profound, eternal blessing that had secured their happiness forever. The great-great-grandchildren of the people who wept at the princess's first, tragic funeral now rejoiced in her enduring peace. The market square was the physical representation of the kingdom's perfect balance, bustling prosperity built upon the foundation of spiritual truth and moral justice, all thanks to a young girl and her refusal to rest. The kingdom was a masterpiece of redemption. Centuries after the events, the Irako tree in the Garden of Truth had grown into a massive, towering behemoth, its roots intertwined with the tombs of the king and queen, creating a single, inseparable monument. The tree stood as the living, breathing heart of the kingdom's spiritual history. Pilgrims traveled from far-off lands, drawn by the tales of the righteous spirit and the wise king. They would touch the bark of the Irako, believing it held the concentrated wisdom and truth of the ancestral spirits. The grove had become a sacred, universal symbol of moral courage. On the day of the Festival of Light and Truth, the king, now descended from Ao, and his queen would personally lead the prayers beneath the Irako's enormous canopy, reaffirming the dynasty's commitment to its founding principles. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, a powerful contrast to the excesses of the banished queen's era. The atmosphere beneath the tree was always intensely emotional, a silent connection to the dramatic events that had occurred centuries ago. People would whisper thanks to Folake, the one who paid the price for their peace. The spirit's memory was not dusty history, but a vibrant, living presence. The enduring strength of the Irako tree symbolized the resilient happiness of the kingdom of Oyo, a happiness forged in fire and secured by the unwavering light of the truth. The physical monument matched the eternal spiritual reality. The final, most profound interpretation of the folktale evolved among the scholars of the Royal Academy of Truth. They concluded that the spirit's vengeance was never about physical torment or death. They taught that the true vengeance was forcing the exposure of the truth, allowing the kingdom to heal and find a deeper peace. The queen's banishment and suffering were viewed as self-inflicted consequences, the natural result of a soul consumed by its own jealousy and hatred, a spiritual law, not arbitrary malice from the princess. The narrative offered profound philosophical comfort that good, even when attacked, possesses the ultimate, self-correcting power. The scholars emphasized that the spirit's work secured the happy ending for the king, the hunter, the royal line, and the entire kingdom, proving that justice, motivated by love, creates life where malice creates death. The story became a celebration of redemptive justice. The legacy of the princess was secured forever. She was the catalyst who traded her brief, beautiful life for the eternal moral purity of her home. Her death was the ultimate sacrifice, her haunting the ultimate protection. The kingdom lived in profound gratitude for the price she paid. The story was complete. It was a perfect, devastating arc of love, sorrow, treachery, supernatural intervention, and ultimate, absolute redemption, securing the greatest and most enduring happy ending imaginable. The tale was now immortal, a beacon for all who seek truth. In a scene set centuries after the king's death, a young girl named Folake, maybe 8 years old, sits by the massive Irako tree, her hand resting on the bark. She is reading the scroll of eternal light, her small brow furrowed in concentration. She is one of hundreds of girls bearing the name, embodying the princess's legacy. Her mother approaches, smiling, carrying a basket of flowers for the shrine. She kneels beside her daughter, pointing to the line in the scroll describing the princess's pure heart. The knowledge of the past is passed down lovingly, not morbidly. "Do you know what the Queen Folake lost, my child?" the mother asks gently. The little girl looks up, her eyes clear and wise. "She lost her heart, Mama, and she lost the light." The profound moral lesson is clearly understood by the smallest child. The mother nods, embracing her daughter. "And you, Folake, carry the light. Never let the darkness of jealousy touch your heart. It destroyed a queen, but your namesake saved a kingdom." The passing of the moral torch is a tender, intimate moment. The little girl rises, places a hand-drawn picture of a lantern at the base of the Irako tree, and runs off toward the sunny square, her laughter bright and pure, the very sound that the first Princess Folake had possessed, now echoing eternally throughout the happy, righteous kingdom. Centuries continued to turn, and the kingdom of Oyo, now known universally as the realm of justice, found itself the center of an unusual kind of pilgrimage. Not religious, but moral. Kings, queens, and rulers from distant, unstable lands journeyed to Oyo. They came seeking the secret to enduring peace and the blueprint for righteous governance that had been secured by the princess's sacrifice. These foreign dignitaries were always taken first to the Royal Academy of Truth, where they were required to listen, without interruption, to the reading of the scroll of eternal light. The emotional honesty of the tale, the raw truth of the king's blindness and the queen's malice, often reduced the hardened rulers to tears. The moral foundation of Oyo proved to be a more powerful diplomatic tool than any military treaty. The climax of the pilgrimage was always a solitary visit to the Garden of Truth. The foreign rulers were encouraged to stand beneath the massive Irako tree, reflecting on the terrible price paid for the justice they now sought to replicate. The sheer, physical presence of the ancient tree was a silent, profound teacher of resilience and truth. King Ao's descendants, the rightful monarchs of Oyo, were known for their profound humility and wisdom. They would share the story, always emphasizing that happiness was not a birthright, but a constant, vigilant effort born from recognizing and purging one's own shadows. The kingdom had perfected the art of governing through shared historical sorrow and ultimate redemption. The foreign dignitaries would leave Oyo changed, returning to their own courts with a new understanding. That true power lay not in crushing enemies, but in establishing a moral order so pure that even the spirits themselves would protect it. The vengeance of Folake, the spirit, had saved not just her home, but influenced the governance of the known world. Even in the distant future of the kingdom, the traditional griots continued to tell the epic tale in its original, vibrant, cinematic style. They used drums and song, sweeping hand gestures, and intense emotional delivery to recreate the palace scenes and the horror of the forest. The theatricality of the tale ensured its continued ability to pierce the hearts of listeners across generations. The most emotionally charged part of the performance was the confession scene, Scene 10, where the griot would portray the king's devastating collapse and the silent, shimmering appearance of the princess's spirit to comfort him. The audience always wept, sharing the king's ancient, cleansing grief and the princess's pure, comforting love. The performance was considered sacred, a living history. It was strictly forbidden to alter the core truth. The queen died not by the king's order, but by the spiritual justice she earned and the mental torment she inflicted upon herself. The integrity of the tale ensured that the moral lesson remained uncorrupted. During the annual festival, the griots would tell the story entirely under the light of the ascending lanterns, their voices rising and falling with the movement of the soft lights. The visual and auditory experience was overwhelming, a beautiful fusion of tradition and catharsis. The event was a masterpiece of storytelling, an experience designed to bring tears and lasting moral resolution. Thus, the cinematic power of the tragic events was never lost. It was lovingly preserved and re-experienced, ensuring that the final, happy ending, the peace and righteousness of the kingdom, was always felt deeply and gratefully by every citizen. The memory was both a beautiful pain and an eternal blessing. The line of Ade, the redeemed hunter, continued to serve as the lifelong royal stewards of the forest and the Garden of Truth. The position was the highest honor for a commoner, symbolizing the kingdom's belief in forgiveness and second chances. Ade's descendants were the living proof that repentance could lead to honorable service. Each new steward was inducted in a quiet ceremony beneath the Irako tree, where they pledged to maintain the sanctity of the ground and to never forget the moral cost of the past. They wore the wooden gazelle carving, the original, preserved under glass, as their badge of office. The tradition was solemn, ensuring the hunter's penance became a permanent part of the happy legacy. The steward's duties included ensuring that the king and queen's tombs were always clean, and that fresh night-blooming flowers were always placed near the princess's monument in the square. They were the custodians of the central stage of the story, serving the victims they were connected to by ancient sin. Their lineage was a constant, humble reminder that evil actions could be redeemed through lifetimes of dedicated, honest work. The sight of the steward quietly tending the gardens was a subtle, powerful reassurance to the kingdom. Their service was the final, quiet act of the spirit's successful intervention in the world. The lineage of Ade was the final, small but essential piece of the happy puzzle. The kingdom could rest, knowing that the former perpetrator had become its most devoted protector, ensuring the darkness would never return to the sacred groves. Justice had secured not just the end of evil, but the beginning of profound good. In the ancestral realm, far removed from the toil and sorrow of the living world, the royal family found their eternal happy ending. King Alyamide, the first queen, and the Princess Folake resided in a place of perpetual light and warmth. Their spirits were radiant, whole, and eternally comforted, their bonds unbreakable. The princess's vengeful nature had entirely dissolved, replaced by a pure, gentle light. She was no longer bound by duty or sorrow, but simply existed in perfect love with her parents, free from the earthly constraints of her tragic life. Her great task was complete. Her ultimate reward was eternal peace with her loved ones. They often looked down upon the kingdom of Oyo, watching the lanterns ascend during the festival, witnessing the justice, prosperity, and moral wisdom they had secured. Their view was one of profound, absolute satisfaction. The tears of the living were now tears of joy, and the spirits rejoiced with them. The first queen, holding her husband's hand, would gently smile at her daughter. She knew that Folake, in her spirit's great courage, had not only avenged her death but had ensured her parents' reunion and the eternal happiness of their people. The great sorrow had led to the great spiritual triumph. The family remained the spiritual guardians of the righteous kings and queens of Oyo, their stories serving as the ultimate guide for their descendants. Their existence in the spirit world was the final, perfect resolution to the devastating tale. Their happiness was the spiritual bedrock upon which the entire kingdom rested. The kingdom of Oyo continued to thrive for millennia, a testament to the power of a legacy founded on truth and moral courage. Its unique history, a king saved by the vengeful spirit of his murdered daughter, was its greatest strength. The lessons learned in tears ensured that the kingdom would never again be led astray by vanity or jealousy. The final happy ending was not merely the king's reunion or the banishment of the wicked queen, but the establishment of a culture of truth that proved eternal. The kingdom was free from the cyclical violence that plagued other lands. The spirit of Princess Folake had secured a perpetual golden age for her people. On the grandest day of the festival, as thousands of lanterns created a magnificent, swirling galaxy of light in the night sky, the king and queen would stand together, watching the spectacular display. They would silently offer a vow of gratitude to the daughter and the spirit whose sacrifice made their peace possible. The very air of Oyo seemed to carry the scent of the irako tree and the night-blooming flower, a gentle, fragrant reminder of the spirit's presence and approval. The kingdom was happy, safe, and morally beautiful. The powerful emotion of the tale guaranteed that the people would forever cherish the justice they possessed. The story of Folake, the princess who was killed by her stepmom out of jealousy, but her spirit did not rest until she took revenge, became the ultimate, tear-jerking folktale, ensuring that her light, and the happiness she secured, would shine upon the kingdom of Oyo, now and forever. Please subscribe, share, like, and comment for more videos.